Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, and thank you for joining us for this FARO live web event. My name is Dean Pearson. I'm an application engineer here at FARO Technologies. And over the next hour, we're going to pull back the curtain for you and share with you some information on capturing crash scene details, just the best practices using your FARO technology. And to help us do that today, we've got Russ Boynton, a guy that gets pawed at all across the country, people always looking for his expertise. He's been doing collision investigation, I think, since dirt was invented, maybe a little bit before that. So we're very pleased to have Russ here with us to share his insights and his best practices for us today. I mean, I get a headache reading all of this guy's bona fides, so please do feel free to look over all of Russ's credentials. He's been doing this for a long, long time. A lot of people threw him salutes as he walked through the halls of New England's and New Hampshire's collision investigation units just because they know about his experience. We're very, very lucky to have him here at FARO Technologies, and the viewers of our presentation, I think we'll see in very short order why we wanted to have Russ here with us today.
So good morning, everyone. Coming live to you from Lake Mary, Florida, so we're enjoying the weather. A lot warmer than it is up in New Hampshire today. So thank you all for joining us this morning. And I wanted to begin by starting out and saying that typically there's a lot more to it than what you're going to see in an hour's time. So I'm going to do my best to, I guess for lack of better terms, give you some teasers and show you how to do some things, mainly how to work on some best practices or some better ways to process your scenes. In addition to that, at the second half of my presentation, I'm going to walk you through the steps of determining speeds from skid marks and also from critical speed scuffs, and that will be at the end of the presentation. I wanted to lay the ground by first just giving you a scenario. First off, I think that most of you out there, whether you're police, investigators, or reconstructionists, or if you're working in the private sector, you understand that if you've done many of these cases, that in the majority of those cases, your case comes down to a time and distance analysis. That time and distance analysis is, for example, to determine, what's the relationship of one car to the other in time and time sequences. Mm-hmm. How long does it take, for example, for a pedestrian to reach the point of impact at the time the car accelerates from the intersection? Things like that. But the foundation for any time and distance analysis, and I know I'm speaking to the choir in most cases, is a speed analysis. So there are, as many of you will probably or do know, that there are 6 ways to do that, at least 6 that can come to mind to me. The most obvious and probably the most often used scenario is to analyze skid marks, measure those skid marks, and then from those measurements determine speed. The next would be a critical speed scuff, maybe a more complicated process if you're doing it longhand, but not as complicated if you're doing it using FARO Zone software. So I'm going to show you how to do those 2 today using a point cloud that's been imported from Scene software, FARO Scene software, into FARO Zone 3D Advanced software to show you how that process is done. And the other 3 ways are video analysis, crush analysis, crash data retrieval, of course, and then momentum analysis. And those we will not get into today, but we just don't have the time to do that. So moving on quickly, I thought that before we even got into the analysis part that we spend a little time first talking about before you respond. And these issues, if you will, have come up in my travels across the United States, working for FARO as a forensic engineer and working directly with police agencies in particular. And some of the things that the reason I have these bullet points up is to tell you that we have to do some things as users of scanning technology. We need to make sure that we do some things that prepare not only ourselves, but our colleagues, our supervisors, our prosecutors on how to handle this new technology. And I start out by saying break the mold by educating our supervisors and colleagues. Most folks, unless you're using laser scanning personally, don't really have an idea of what laser scanning is or what that laser scanning technology can deliver. So it's important that you let other people in your agency know what this technology is all about. And not only that, the next level is to educate your prosecutors. Let your prosecutors know what this technology is, because they are the people that are going to, and especially in a criminal case, or if you're a private customer and you're dealing with a customer, they need to know what deliverables they can expect to get from the technology that you are using. And those deliverables, we'll go over them again, I'm sure, but they're in out-of-scene software. They are scene to go, fly-through videos, orthographic photographs, and then moving into FARO Zone, they are diagrams and animations. So be prepared I urge you to speak with your prosecutors to show them what this technology is and what you can do with it. Otherwise, it's going to sit in a folder somewhere and not be utilized to its fullest potential. Next up is work with your administration and prosecutors. It's sort of really there's a fine line between bullet 2 and bullet 3, but I say work with, meaning that there are some other things that need to be done here, and below that in my small type it says develop new standard operating procedures. What I am seeing is throughout my travels that there's the technology is way ahead of the standard operating procedures that are being used by police departments. Oftentimes there is no protocol for backing up or storing data from the scanner. Lots of times there's no protocol for saving the projects that have been processed and registered and developed into a complete project, if you will, and those are not stored in a place where they can be recalled if necessary. And it would be extremely bad to lose that information, to have that information suppressed from court because, for whatever reason, you cannot locate the original scan data files, or that you've lost the original work that you did in order to produce the
so many moving parts, right? Standard operating procedures, they're just going to save you heartburn at the end of the day. Know where your stuff is going, know how to get it, know who's got access to it, and be organized when it's time to show to judge and jury or customer, whoever, right?
Yes. Right. The last one on my bullet list here deals mostly with training your first-line supervisors in the art of scanning. And I don't want to make this complicated, but what we're seeing a lot of is scanning can go very quickly. Scenes can be processed very quickly. And the folks that are working in the field, especially the folks that are using the laser scanner, are typically responding and showing up and then waiting a significant time before their work can begin. And I think there's a better way to manage that time by telling your first-line supervisors what it is, how much time do you need. And I realize that all cases are different. All projects, all scene investigations are different. But by and large, they need to know that unlike, for example, using a survey instrument, the setup time is less than 5 minutes. And the scene can be, in most cases, processed in an hour or so, and sometimes even much less than that. So it's important that they know that you don't need a lot of time in most cases.
Right.
I do want to walk through these a little more quickly than I hoped that I would, but I think that it's important we get to all of these before we run out of time on the practical part of this. First off, I mean, you can't arrive at a scene, and I think most of you would know this. Most of you have probably processed a crash scene before, so maybe I'm preaching to the choir a little bit. But, you know, the first thing that we would typically do as a crash investigator or reconstructionist is to walk through the scene to identify mostly what needs to be, in the case of the laser scanner, captured by the laser scanning process. And in particular, identifying things that may be under objects that are not necessarily visible to the scanner, and things that are also short-lived, or things that may be inside a car, so that you can identify and make certain that you don't forget to scan those objects before they are gone forever. So identify short-lived evidence is certainly something that you should do right away. Again, I may be preaching to the choir on this. We all know that if there are things that can be blown away in the wind, if there are hair fibers or fabric, for example, that's on the side of a car because of a pedestrian crash. You might want to get to those things first off. There are other things to consider. My third bullet is to scan the scene from the inside and work out. I'm always asked about how much time does it take for me to process the scene, to get that scene scanned and clear the roadway and leave and then open the roadway up for traffic. That's really entirely up to you, and it depends on whatever situation or whatever cards you are dealt. I recommend that in many cases you might not have to take the time to process 500 feet, 750 feet, or 1,000 feet down the roadway. That if it's a matter of opening the roadway quickly to allow traffic to go through, or maybe it's a hazardous situation, maybe there's bad weather coming in that might conceal or destroy some of your evidence, that you would do some quick scans around the center of your crash, mainly in the area of the impact of your crash, and make sure that you capture those marks on the roadway first.
How long is it going to take to document a scene? You might as well ask, how long is a piece of string, right? Every situation is different. Do I have 1, 2, 3 cars? How long is the scene, et cetera? So variable is probably a good way to put it, right? But I am interested in, you say, the inside-out approach. What do you mean by that?
So good question, Dean. In most crash reconstruction cases, we are taught to analyze the crash really at the end of the crash, starting at the end of the crash, which is in most cases the point of impact or the area of impact, and then working our way back in time using speed to determine where things were prior to the crash. So it would be no different in documenting the scene. If all of your evidence is at one location, say in the center of an intersection, it's probably best practice to get into that middle of the intersection and scan that information and document that information first, because the legs or the approaches of the vehicles coming into the intersection are not as much of a priority as getting the information that's in the roadway before it's gone.
So but now this is kind of where I counteract myself. I play devil's advocate here. Just as every scene is different and could take variable amounts of time, you could do yourself a favor, though, by establishing this plan. That's going to remain pretty consistent, right?
Yes. Yes, it would be. Namely, by walking around the scene when you first arrive, you, especially after you've done it a few times, will develop a plan that you will typically follow in any on-scene investigation as far as using the laser scanning technology. The other thing, while I'm here, I want to remind everyone, if you don't know, that your scanner settings, and I believe I have a note to mention this later on in the presentation today, that those scanner settings can be changed at any time in the process. And the reason I bring that up now is it really just depends on what you want in terms of a deliverable. If you want your scene to be colorful and there's enough light, we'll get into that in a moment, but you can leave the color on, and scanning around the area of impact is a good time to have that color on. And then when you're moving away from the area of impact, maybe the color is not as significant, it's not as important. You can turn the color off and then therefore move faster through the process of scanning the rest of the approaches to your crash site.
I have another question, and it's a point of clarification. You said you can adjust our settings at any time. To be clear, Mr. Boynton, can we do that mid-scan?
No.
Okay.
No. This is really just a recap of what I just mentioned. There are some other things to consider. I try not to dwell too much on how much time do I have? My reconstructionist reply to that is as much time as you need to do the job properly. I know that some of you, especially if you're on-scene investigators, you're pressured to get the road open as quickly as possible. But at the end of the day, if you're not taking the necessary number of scans to document your scene, then that is an issue. That being said, the process of documenting a scene from beginning to end using laser scanner is much quicker. At least if you use some of the tools I'm about to speak about. Weather is certainly an issue. I mentioned that. Hazardous materials or hazardous situations, traffic, unsafe conditions. Scanner settings we're going to get into here in a moment. How many scans do you need? I'm going to show you some techniques for scanning your scene. couple of techniques, and then what to scan now. And that what to scan now note applies to, well, do I really need to do all of the scans like right now while I'm at my site? Can I return later at a time when the traffic is not as bad? Or
maybe fill in some dead spots in an area or something along those lines, right? But that sidewalk's still going to be there tomorrow. Correct. That scuff mark may not be. That's correct. So that's all part of a well laid out, established routine to capture the stuff that may not be there tomorrow. And you know, you talked about scanner placement, and that's why the next slide is so interesting to me, because I get this question all the time as a trainer of forensic software for the field. Scanner placement. Where do we put our scanners, Russ? Any rules of thumb for us?
There are a number of things to consider here, but I think the most important consideration is what scanner are you using. If you are using a shorter range scanner, for example, the S series, the S70 scanner, which is a 70-meter range scanner, versus are you using an S350 or a 350-meter scanner, then the placement or the distance or separation from one scan to the next will change significantly. So obviously, the shorter range scanners, the S70, require same scanner in terms of the data that it collects, in terms of its accuracy, but the distances from one scan to the next would be half that of what you could use for a 150 and a quarter of what you could use for a 350 scanner. So that's a consideration that you would need to make if you were purchasing a scanner. Right. What am I going to be scanning, and how far? What's the range that does that scanner need to be? In this example, this is showing one of the techniques. In this case, is to zigzag your scanning locations, moving not necessarily across the street every time that you're moving over 50 feet from one scan to the next, but going down the roadway at 50-foot intervals, and then crossing the roadway, and then offsetting the scans from the opposite side of the street, and then moving in the opposite direction. It keeps a chronological order of your scans, and it also captures both sides of the roadway. What's also important to point out in this case, I do have an example of this later in the slide set, is that when the scanning was taking place here, it was not set at 360 degrees, so the horizontal scanning area was reduced to 180 degrees, which really means that when you're standing on the shoulder, you're not capturing any data behind you. You're only capturing data in front of you.
Can I jump in here real quick? Because we just got a really, I think, germane comment from Keith, who says, all the scans that I receive don't have any scans after the vehicles have been removed from the scene. Therefore, any evidence under the vehicle is not documented. Little curveball here for you, Russ. How do we deal with that, well, for all intents and purposes, invisible evidence that's under a questioned vehicle?
No, that's a really good question. Unfortunately, that is a situation. It's like taking a photograph, right? If the photograph does not reveal or does not, there's not a photograph taken of the area, then of course that information cannot be documented, at least at that time. But there is, if the evidence is not short-lived and is still on the roadway, right, there's an opportunity to go back. And I know that's probably from a private reconstructionist or private consultant. And if we're lucky enough, we can get back to the scene before all of the evidence is gone. Typically, that's not the case.
And for those of us documenting the scene with our FARO laser scanner, I mean, we take them off the tripod, too. We can put those underneath. There's many creative ways that we can scan the scene as well. But I thought Keith's comment was pretty germane there.
It is. And Keith also, and I'll show you here in a moment, there may be things that you cannot see under the car that are actually visible. The scan, because it scans in both color, if color is being used, and in grayscale or infrared, there are things that are under the car that you may not see using color scanning, but you can see looking at the infrared imagery produced by the scanner. And I have a really great example of that later on.
You know, we're getting so many great questions. Thank you, by the way. Keep them coming down in the Q&A panel in the bottom corner. Let's put the old man to the test today. Let's make sure we put his experience to the test. We're getting a lot of great questions, a couple of which I think really fit into the subject matter here. So I'm going to take a point of personal privilege here and jump in. Adam asks, does the scanner pick up rain?
That's a really good question, actually, and it's a very common question. The scanner does pick up rain if the color option is turned on during the scan process. In other words, when the scanner makes its second pass and then captures photographs at the scanner location, it takes 66 photographs at each scanner location. It will capture water that's coming down, if it's coming down hard enough, and it will capture water and actually continue to capture water that may have landed on the prism of the scanner. The way around that is to scan in laser without color, in just using the laser, the infrared laser photographs and scans, and therefore it does not show up at all. I forgot about the grayscale option there. I'm a guy, I'm almost always colorizing my scans before I go in, but again, depends on the situation, right? Good thoughts, thanks. Next screen. This is really just another way of doing this. And in this case, I just wanted to point out that you can tell, if you look at it closely, that all of the scans were taken from your view, from the bottom of the roadway, I guess along the Jersey barrier, all the way down the roadway on one side, and no information was captured on the other side or the top side of that roadway. And I don't think that was done intentionally. I think that you can tell that in the absence of data at that location, that there were objects, probably vehicles, that were blocking the scanner from seeing information or gathering information from the other side. So one thing to keep in mind, the scanner is a line of sight instrument, just like a total station survey instrument is a line of sight instrument. And if the scanner cannot see it, it can't capture it. Mm-hmm. Good thing they're so portable. Another quick question here that I want to kind of combine, because I think they're both two portions of the same type of question, and it deals with scanner placement and sphere placement. Ryan wants to know, when establishing the plan, how much space should be used between spheres if the investigator determines that's the best way to target our scene? I'd like to, if I can, go back to that a little bit later on, but there is a quick answer is to tell you that the distance between the scanner and the spheres is really determined by the resolution that you're scanning at. The higher the resolution, the further away that sphere can be. Obviously, the closer the sphere is, and the lower resolution you can use. But you do need to make sure that the scanner is capturing enough of that sphere for there to be a lock on it. The software needs to recognize. We'll go into that a little bit more a little bit later on. I'm often asked about how many scans do I need to do around a car, and the simple answer for that is, how many photographs would you take to document the damage, for example, to a car? And in this case, I've used 8 scans, and then there are 2 that you will notice are near the right rear corner of this vehicle. And so the 8 scans are what I would do if I was using a digital SLR camera. I would take 1 at each plane of the vehicle and then 1 from each corner of the vehicle. And in this case, 2 close-ups to document what was an imprint on the rear bumper. So I've created a fly-through right after this just to show you how a fly-through video can be used to bring the viewer around the car to look at the vehicle, and then zoom in and then stop at the rear bumper in this case. We're getting more than one attendee of today's webinar asking maybe more of a generic rule of thumb question, Russ, and now might be a good time for that. It deals with scanner placement. Can you give us kind of a go-to spacing between the scanner, go-to setting, all things being equal? Is there something that you would do on a regular basis? I'll jump ahead. We are going to get there. Okay. I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction to that. It's basically outdoor resolution is typically between 1/5 and 1/4 resolution, by and large, and anywhere between 3 times and 4 times quality setting. Mm-hmm. On scanner distances, again, it depends on your scanner, but let's just say that you're always safe if you're taking 20 steps, 30 steps at a minimum. Okay. All right, good. And I know that you've got that information coming up, but so many people are asking the same question, I thought I'd interject. Please carry on, Mr. Boynton. So control your scene. This is the last I'll talk about it as far as scene management goes. I I think that, again, I'm preaching to the choir, but there are still reasons to make sure that people and objects are not moving through your scene. And the most important phase of the scanning process is when, well, not the most important, but one of the times when something moving through your scene would have the most significant negative impact would be when people are walking by your scanner or sticking their face into the scanner when it's taking a photograph.
That would never happen.
It never happens,
never.
Especially if you're on the force. The thing I want to mention, that some of the newer features, if you do not have the most current version of the firmware upgrade on your laser scanner, is there are some new features, namely the photo retake option, and now the photo or the scanning pause option. So if you can see something coming toward your scanner, you can pause the scan and then continue when that object goes through. So it's a great new feature that was just released a week or so ago.
Excellent. Now, I know that we're moving into scanner settings, and we're going to look at, best practices for that in just a moment. But first, I've got to ask another very popular question. Scanner elevation. Do I want to be at the same height the whole time? Do I want to vary? What's the best practice there?
That's another great question. Actually, both. Let's say if I need to, in the case of the vehicle that you just saw, if it was important to me to document the roof of that vehicle, the scanner, in order to capture that information, would have to be higher than the elevation of the roof, because it can't see the roof if it's lower than the elevation of the roof. But on the other side of that is people, I think, are afraid to remove the scanner from the tripod, and you purchase it with a tripod, obviously, but then there are times when you may not want to have the scanner on the tripod. For example, placing it on the driver's side floorboard of a vehicle, or on the center console of a vehicle, or on the rear deck, or underneath the car, or near the rear of a car, say in a pedestrian strike. So don't get locked into thinking that the scanner has to always be sitting on that tripod. The scanner does not rotate on the base at the tripod. It rotates on the internal housing of the unit. So it doesn't need to be there in order to scan.
All right, good stuff. Let's move on to this. Formatting the SD card. People want to know about this a lot. Do we got to do it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I can tell you some horror stories on these. Let's say the scenario is you're on your scene and you finish up with 20 scans, and you go back to your department or your office and you go to import those scans, and they're not there. I think the surest way to make certain that your scanner, your SD card is communicating with your scanner on scene, is to make sure that card is formatted. I recommend, and FARO recommends, that it's done every single time you turn that scanner on. Some agencies share their SD cards, and they're used by other folks in the office, and sometimes you just never know whether that card has been corrupted in any way. You don't know if it's even been formatted in the first place. So I recommend strongly that you do that.
And just to remind our audience, we are talking about best practices here. This is the best practice. Can you do it every time? Maybe not. But if you've got the ability to do so, always recommend it. Right?
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Next up is scan with color and grayscale, and this is we'll spend a few minutes on this. I have some examples for you. This is a decision that you will make in every case. And I would say that this is the most common question that I receive when I'm doing workshops with police agencies. They receive a call out at 2 or 3 in the morning, and they encounter varying lighting situations that they're seeing. And the one I'm about to show you is one where the only lighting on the scene is actually at the car itself. It's the one vehicle collision. But what you will also see are the blue lights, blue strobe lights sort of burned into the image. Right. The scanner, when it's turned to color on, is basically a camera. And it's going to take photographs just like a camera will. So my advice to you is think photography. If you're in a low-lit area or an unlit area, your scanner will only see as far as maybe the flash would show you if you're using a DSLR. So keep that in mind. This scene is literally at the center of that screen. I'm sorry, toward the bottom of the screen is where the car was lit up by some artificial lighting. and I believe the brake lights are on in this case. So this is what a scan looks like when color is turned on, and you process and register a nighttime scan with virtually no light other than on the object.
All of that ambient light is from the taillights?
That is from a set of artificial lights placed on the side of the roadway and the taillights of the vehicle.
Wow. I got to butt in. Michael Cosentino wants to know, what is the recommended amount of light for nighttime crashes? I understand that sometimes accidents happen at night.
This one, my recommendation, if there's no light, is to not scan in color. If there are a number of street lights in the area, I think you'll have pretty decent success with that. This one's an example of when you would absolutely want to use grayscale and not have color turned on. But it's a great example to show you what can go bad. But the good news is with laser scanning is that even if you scan with color and even if you get that result, your infrared data is always there. Mm-hmm. Your scan data is always there. So it's just a matter of reprocessing without the color, and then you'll have a beautiful result, and I'll show you those up next. This is the next slide. This is just the same scan set, but this is an orthographic photograph looking down onto the same area, and you can see that where the car is located, you can just see the one side of the car really, and beyond that, it's just black. So that's an example of what you would get scanning with color on, excuse me. Next slide, please. This is the same scan set reprocessed in grayscale, and then this is another orthographic photograph that was produced from the scan, and then also in the inset is a blow-up of the area of where the vehicle came to rest. And I'm going to show you a couple more slides. We can go right to those now. This next slide is the overview map of that vehicle. The overview map, again, created in Scene software, FARO Scene software. This is showing the scanner positions in the overview map, and on the right image, it's showing that if you select those dots, that you can then go directly into the 3D data or a quick view or planar view. And so I use this process to move straight into a quick view at that scanner location at the back left-hand corner of that car, so you can see I've selected that. So the next slide, please. This will show you what the lighting, the impact of the lighting is in this case. You have artificial lighting to the left side of your screen, and it's basically burned out any useful information in that location. Not that there's useful information there.
Now, when you say burned out, you mean washed out?
Washed it out.
Okay, all right.
And over on the right, you can see there's a police vehicle in the upper right-hand end of the road, and then the taillights of the car also wash out any detail at the back of the car. There's something that you can't see at the back of the car because color with limited light is going to conceal, or it's going to conceal information in your scan. So the next slide shows you what it looks like with color off. And you can see, I told you earlier that I would show you an object that could not have been seen in the photographs, but now using infrared, you can see, and you can see all of the debris and all of the information, all of the roadway around that vehicle, but in particular the wheel that's underneath the right rear corner.
Sure,
of
you
the
didn't see that in the color.
That's right.
So, and I know that our friend Josh here asking about skid marks is going to be quite impressed with what we see a little bit later on.
This next image is I've been doing some experimenting using some artificial lighting, and I also get the question of, well, if we're using artificial lighting, how does that? What are the results of that if we add light to the scene? Your best practice here is to, if you're using artificial lighting, is to get that lighting as high above your scene as possible. And what you don't want to do is have the scanner sitting right next to the light and having it scan directly into the lighting source. This scan set, this is only 2 scans, and this was using the low setting of the applying high dynamic range photography, which your scanner is also equipped with. So this was additional time on the scans. I believe we were up to about 8 minutes a scan, but 2 scans. So 15 minutes later, this is the result that we had using artificial lighting in an otherwise totally unlit area. these are the magical questions, like what are my scanner settings supposed to be? I want to start out really simply by just saying smaller distances or units of measurement between one data point and the next require higher resolutions. In other words, if you're using the laser scanner, the higher you push that number up, the higher the resolution is, the tighter those measurements or data points will be to one another.
Right.
The lower the resolution, the more separation there is.
More detail you'll get.
Yes,
right.
correct.
But the price you pay, a little bit longer in the
price
scanning
you pay,
time, right?
That's right. Price you pay is time. If time is not an issue and you're looking at creating a photorealistic scan of your scene, project, deliverables for your scene, then don't worry about it. Crank the resolution up and have fun. Yeah. How close do you want, I put the questions up there, how close do you want your measurements to be? The question is, I think from the reconstructionist or from the forensic side of it is, what is good for my case? Do I really care if my measurements are 1/4 of an inch apart at 30 feet away? Or is an inch okay? It's really entirely up to you. I'm going to show you where to look on the scanner. I believe it's the next slide to give you, to show you what that measurement is. So on the left side, and what I want you to really focus on are those two blocks that are outlined in red. At 1/4 resolution, 3 times quality, it tells you while you're looking at the scanner in real time that the distance that those points will be at 30 feet out from my scanner location, in this case, is 0.221 inches. If less than 1/4 of an inch is okay for you, which I would suggest is totally fine in the crash reconstruction field, then that's maybe a setting you want to use. The one on the right, I've dropped the resolution down to 1/5, and then I've kept the quality setting the same. And you'll notice there's not really that much of a difference between the two, 0.22 on the left and then 0.27 on the right. So just over 1/4 inch. Right. 1/4 inch on the lower resolution.
And you touched on something that I think is a really important fact for our viewers, and that is that you've got to get out there and you got to practice with this stuff a little bit, right?
Correct.
You will, after you do enough scan sets, you'll figure out kind of where your level of detail is. If you're going in blind, not knowing what to expect, yeah, sure, I can see what it says, but what does that mean in practical use? Best solution, get out there and go do it, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Next scan, please, or next slide, please, Paul. I'm kind of stuck on scans here today. And we're going to talk about overlapping. How far do I go?
Maintain overlap. This is a big one, and it's a big one because if there's not enough common data between your first scan and your second scan, and your second scan and your third scan, that those scans will not register together in the software. I have different recommendations here. I believe that FARO's has recommended or does recommend that it's a minimum of 35% overlap. And you may struggle with, well, what do I know? What's 35%? What are we talking about in terms of numbers? I've done some other numbers on the next slide, which I'll get to in just a moment. But first, this 35%, I can tell you from experience, I've done thousands of scans, that 35% is in fact a minimum, and I would recommend maybe moving that up a little bit.
And bringing back full circle to where we started, part of that preparation as we're walking our scene to determine, we're going to make a mental note, oh, I want my scanner placements to be 20 feet apart, for example. Got a baseline measurement, right?
Yes. This is kind of a cool number that I came up with. I did some research through my reconstruction journals and then went online, and it wasn't Wikipedia, but I found out that the average step distance for a woman in the United States is 2.2 feet, and the average step distance for a male is 2.5. So if we work on the shorter side of that, so we're always in a safety zone. If you were moving, if you wanted a 50% overlap, for example, using an S70 scanner, you could maybe go up to 23 steps apart from one scan position to the next. And I've broken it down in red to show you what those steps are. I think it's counterproductive for someone to get the roller wheel out and then start spray painting every 50 feet or whatever down the roadway. There's no reason for you to be measuring your scanner placement when you're on scene. Right. You can walk it out, just estimate what that. And over time, you will get a feel for how far those scan positions should be.
So again, best practices, folks. That's what we're talking about. Sort of some rules of thumb. When we're under the hammer for time, you know, we can sort of dedicate some of this stuff to memory, and it'll be best practices when we're on the scene. Got to interject with another timely question from Eric. Eric wants to know, understanding the extra time needed to scan with color, why not do so and then process without the color?
No, that's absolutely a process that I know that many customers use. Or if you're just one of, I know that a lot of the private customers just don't use color at all. And so conversely, why would you waste the time to scan in color and add 3 minutes to every scan if you're never going to use it? So add 3 minutes minimum for having color on per scan location, or slice 3 minutes off per scan location if you have no intention of using color in the first place.
How long is a piece of string, right? You do yourself a huge service by planning out your scene before you ever push the button for scan 1.
Correct.
All right. Up next, what are we moving into now?
We are just showing you an example on this next slide of what will look like on the scan to the right, the FAR scan on the right-hand side of the screen. The scanner, you can tell, has been placed directly over the center line of the roadway. And you'll notice that I did a measurement between that first scanner placement to the middle the middle scan, the one in the middle of the screen, and that distance is just over 50 feet. So in that case, when they pasted out, this, by the way, was using an S70 scanner, and you can see that there's very little data missing between the two scan locations. Actually, it's a pretty nice scan. But you'll notice on the next set where the distance between the middle scan and the scan to the far left of the screen is much greater, and I can't see, I think it's 70-something, 78 feet, almost 80 feet. And you can see that because the distance is longer, there's some data, the data in the middle is a little bit sparse, so you can see where it's not quite as saturated. Personally, I would prefer to not have that occur in my final presentation. I like the setup of the arrangement on the right a little bit better.
Right.
Just something to think about.
All right, we've got another scanner setting to look at in our next slide.
And consider reducing the scan area. I mentioned that just a while ago, but don't be stuck in thinking that every single scan that you do has to be at 360 degrees horizontally or 300 degrees vertically.
Right.
There are options, and there are ways of cutting your scan time down by changing those settings. So if we can just go to the next slide, I'll show you some examples. By default, the scanner will always, by the way, this is where you find that setting. It's under the scan parameters, and it's the third tab down entitled horizontal vertical. So if you click that button, it will bring you to that setting. By default, the scanner captures 360 and 300. The way that you would change that is simply by typing in, all right, what scan area what do I want to limit my scan area to? In this case, I use 90 degrees. Next slide, please. And on the left, you can see that the 90 degrees, it's going to capture the first quarter of the total area. And the setting on the right, I used 180 degrees to show that it would capture only half of what it was originally set to capture.
So this is relative to what? What's our setup position? Where do we measure 90 and 180 from?
Thank you for pointing that out, and I forgot to add that to my slide presentation. But if you're looking at the LED screen of your scanner, the zero location of that scanner is to your left. So I'm going to do the visual. If you put your arms straight out and you look to the left, if you're looking at the scanner directly in front of you, left is 0, right is 180, and then 90. If you take that right hand and you put it right in front of you, that's 90 degrees. So you have to make sure that the scanner's capturing the area that you told it to.
So we're moving around a 360-degree compass clockwise.
That's correct. And 0, if you forgot the looking left from the screen, there is a little tiny, I think, well, for the S series, is a little tiny white dot right at the base, on the silver base of the scanner. That's 0. And I believe on the older scanners, the X120 and 330s, I believe it's a red dot. I might be wrong on that, but.
So here's my rookie question for you, Mr. Boynton. Cutting a 360-degree scan into a 180-degree scan, will that by necessity cut my scan time in half?
No, it's not. It's not linear.
Okay.
It will reduce your scan time, but not in half.
Okay. Thank you. Next slide. Josh, here you go, my friend.
So this is I think a relatively easy answer to a question that I always get is, well, will the scanner capture skid marks? Sure, it will, as long as you can see the skid marks too. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the scanner can't work miracles. It can't create something that does not exist.
Right.
If you cannot see the skid mark, then chances are that the scanner will not capture it. Sometimes those of us who have worked in the field for a while know that if you use a polarized lens, that the polarized lens will help reveal maybe some of that shadowing or impending skid mark area. But don't expect the scanner to create something that you cannot see. There are times when marks are very, very faint. Let's say in the case of ABS system employed, and there's just a shadowing of skids on the surface of the roadway. And those marks, you may want to consider marking those with some paint before the scan, so those can be captured.
Really neat question here. Kind of going back a little bit, but it's very timely. Mike Fisher wants to know. So I make my viewing scan range different, 180 degrees on one. Mike wants to know, can I combine 360-degree scans with 180-degree scans?
Absolutely.
There you go, Mike.
Be a warning on that, though. I do want to warn you that you don't want to restrict your scan area so that it's so small that the scanner has difficulty capturing common points.
Right.
You have to make sure that whatever you do, that there's enough common or overlap points to be able to have a good registration.
Good stuff. Can I jump in for 1 sec?
Yes, sir.
I have a watch on my wrist, and the watch on my wrist tells me that we're at about the 59-minute mark, which is generally when we would kind of knock things off. But we've got permission to go a little bit longer. For those of you that joined us today that only had 60 minutes, thank you, thank you, thank you. I understand that these presentations will be made available later on. We're recording this. We'll be sending it out to registered participants. But if you can squeeze out another 15 minutes, I know Russ has got a whole bunch more great information to share with us.
We're getting close.
All right.
Getting close. The next slide is to show you the difference between a scan during the daylight hours, which is on the left of your screen, and the scan that's taken at night. Same vehicle, same skid marks, same marks. And I guess the important thing to stress here is that the infrared at nighttime does a fantastic job. So even in a no light situation, the skid marks in this case, for example, are quite visible. So there's no issue with the scanner capturing skid marks if in fact they are visible to the human eye. And these are two extremes. The one on the left is a situation you can, I believe, if your monitor is good enough, you can see the faint skid marks that are in the lane. And you can also see that in this case, the police agency marked those skid marks so that when they scanned it and they photographed it, that the location of those marks and the length of those marks are visible. Then the one on the right, the skid marks are way more conspicuous, and you can see that they go for quite a distance down the roadway. And in that case, the agency didn't feel that it was necessary to mark those skid marks with paint. So it just depends on what you find is going to be, if you have a situation like the one on the left, you may want to consider putting some markers down.
Got to jump in with a couple more really germane, on-point questions. The first one comes from Ed. I see some pink paint marked on the asphalt there. Ed wants to know, is there an ideal paint color for marking our roads like that?
Not really. No, any color. And I think it's useful from experience to mark different tire marks with different color paint.
Different vehicles, right? Yeah, okay. And along the same line, sorta, Keith also says, most scans that I get do not show the skid marks very well compared to the photo of the skid mark derived from the scanner or other sources. Keith wants to know, is there a scanner setting that's causing that?
It can be a scanner setting, but I think probably what's going on is that the scans are being taken in color, and typically it's in a situation where it's not enough light or there's too much light, and the skid mark is the skid mark is not visible because of the reflection or the bright light from the sun on the roadway. the best thing to do in that case is to then turn off the color or to look at that scan in grayscale and then mark the locations of the skid in grayscale, and you can see them well there.
There you go, Keith. Best practices.
I had a step-by-step guide here, but I just wanted to explain to you what's occurring in this the next two videos. We're at a place in the presentation, actually 10 minutes away from finishing, that I am in the first instance getting a speed analysis from the skid marks in that example I just showed you where they were very conspicuous. Mm-hmm. And I'm just marking, I'm using FARO Zone software to first import the point cloud into FARO Zone. Right. Then I am marking the skid marks using the curve of the line tool. And then I am using the power tool, the skid analysis button under the power tools tab to then do a speed calculations, letting the software do the speed calculations. And then from that, producing a report, a very comprehensive report.
A lot of our customers really like that sort of menu of different drag factors that are available.
Yep. And it's awesome. That's the IPTM published drag factors. And then if those don't fit your needs, then you can change those manually. The other thing that it does, you can probably see for yourself, is that once those skids are brought into the tool, it also automatically calculates grade and super elevation on the roadway. So there's no need to manually calculate rise over run. It's already done for you when you draw the lines along the skid marks.
If I could get Paul to pause that for just one moment, I want a point of clarification here for our audience. They might be looking at that going, hey, he's doing a skid calculation from a point cloud. To be clear, Mr. Boynton, what we've done is we traced that skid mark from our point cloud data using a CAD tool in FARO Zone 3D. And that's actually what we're analyzing here is the line, not the point cloud, right?
That's right.
Okay. Thank you. Paul, carry on. Thank you, sir.
We can just let this slide play through. I think the largest benefit from this is the production of the report, and you have the ability when the report is printed to add your name, your case number, your agency, whatever that may be, location, case name, and in this case, it shows you the number of skids that were used to calculate your speed. One other thing I wanted to point out there is a refresh button on the right side of that panel. Just be sure that when you're adding more than one skid, that you're refreshing the calculation so that it shows the combined speed from multiple skids instead of just the one speed. This is a report that's generated by the skid analysis tool. And I'm saving the PDF report to my desktop, and then I think I show you a copy of that PDF report finalized for inclusion in my report or my analysis.
Very thorough report, isn't it?
It is. You'll see here that all of the input data is there, all of the results are there. And in this case, the math is not shown, but in the momentum analysis report, which we will not get into today, there's a comprehensive list of all of the formulas and all of the results from those formulas. This next video is the critical speed scuffs tool. And in this case, I really didn't have a good point cloud to show you a critical speed scuff in a case that I could reveal, that is. Mm-hmm. And so I'm drawing out a curve on my ground plane in FARO Zone to represent what would be a scuff mark. And we know as investigators and reconstructionists, the scuff always starts out on a wider or longer radius, and toward the end it gets more narrow. So I'm just using I'm using the critical speed scuff tool in FARO Zone, and I'm doing basically the same thing I did in the last example. And here is the other results of the different radii from that arc, and the results of my speed from that arc, and then again saving that report out to my desktop in a PDF format.
New England's coming out, drawing,
yes.
And all that. Now, a couple more Q&A questions. Here is a general knowledge question, and it's such a good one from Ed. Ed, you're getting a lot of airtime here today, partner. How do you know if the skid marks on your scene were as a result of your current incident, or weren't there before? How do you know?
That's not a FARO question, but I do have the answer for you.
That's why I'm throwing it at you.
There are a number of things that you need to look at, and I know that comes up often in both criminal and civil cases, but you need to articulate as a reconstructionist how you know that that skid mark belongs to that vehicle. And generally, you do that by tying in the skid mark leading up to the area of impact or the point of impact, and then seeing what happens from there. Where do the cars go, and does that match up with the evidence that you have on the roadway? That's the general answer to that question, and it takes some experience in most cases. It's not hard. It's not easy for everyone to be able to do that. But over time, when you develop your reconstruction skills, you know what to look for, and you know how to match those up.
I know some longtime investigators, guys that have maybe been doing it even as long as you, that say, "I'd like to get down. I want to smell the pavement. You know, I want to really feel the environment." And maybe that, you know, I know that's an exaggeration and a silly example, but the truth of the matter is, once you see enough of them, you start to get a feel for it.
Another simple way, although not 100% reliable, is to measure the tracking width. That is the distance from the width of one skid mark in relation to the other, and does that match up with the tracking width of the cars that were involved? So it's another technique to check out.
I've been in this industry for almost a decade now, and I've never seen this question. Chris White wants to know, have you ever been able to catch shoe scuffs in a car V-PED, maybe using IR or color photography? What a great question. I've never heard that.
No, it's a good question, and I have. It was before my scanner days, though, so unfortunately I don't have an example of that to show you. There have been times where I've seen that, and I've documented that just using regular photography. And there have been times where I remember in the days of our classroom time where we were told that if pedestrians hit hard and fast enough that they're literally taken from their boots or their shoes, and that those remain in place. And I've seen that occur as well. Rarely, but it does happen.
Well, you know what, Mr. Boynton? I think our clock has just about run out on us. Even the overtime period that we just played has just run out. Russ, any last thoughts for me?
I am here to help. I'm sure there's a way that you can contact me. FARO's always willing to assist you with any questions you have about the scanner and how to apply it in your application. So feel free to reach out to me.
He's Russ Boynton. My name is Dean Pearson. We're both application and sales engineers at FARO Technologies. On behalf of everyone at FARO Technologies in the Public Safety Wing, we want to thank you for your time and attention today. We hope you found it to be a good use of your time. Happy scanning.